This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
With
the beginning of the 6th year of the occupation of Iraq, the Pentagon acknowledged that the death toll of U.S. soldiers have reached 4,000 after 4 soldiers were killed yesterday evening by a roadside bombing of their patrol in southern Baghdad.
President George Bush and his Vice President Dick Cheney expressed their pain and sorrow for the killings of many of their soldiers.
Like any normal person who is escaping the responsibility of shedding people's blood, Bush expressed his pain over the fact that the death toll of U.S. soldiers killed during his occupation of Iraq has reached 4,000, according to official estimates. Although the reality on the ground indicates that the number of soldiers killed is much higher than the Pentagon numbers, Bush insists that he is winning and his decisions were right.
I wouldn't say the number is inaccurate, but it is actually much lower than reality. As eyewitnesses to reality, we see a lot of incidents that take place with the U.S. Army, which are not publicized.
Cheney, Bush's vice president, may have been closer to the truth, which states that what has happened in Iraq is a catastrophe. However, he describes the situation as tragic, but stops short of talking about the human loss of his forces in Iraq, expressing his sorrow over the death of Americans. However, the millions of killed, injured, and displaced Iraqis who are not convinced by all of Bush's reasons and slogans to justify the destruction of their country mean nothing to him.
God willing, that number will be 4 million and more. We haven't seen any improvement whatsoever. They said they were going to bring democracy, but we haven't seen any democracy. They said they were going to bring freedom. Is freedom killing?
This is an occupation of Iraq. We must resist it and kill more than 4,000 of them. If they would have stayed in their country, they would have not lost 4,000.
However, Bush insists on staying in Iraq and does not regret the catastrophe that he caused himself and his country. For him to be convinced, perhaps, he is waiting for the death toll of soldiers in his country to exceed the number of those killed in the Vietnam War, which reached 58,000, to be convinced that this was a catastrophe. That is, if he can be convinced.
I think it is incredibly demoralizing to go for your 3rd, 4th, or 5th deployment to watch your friends die. More casualties being mounted up on a war that was given false pretense to go in the first place. To honor those who died, we must withdraw from Iraq.
Deception and lies were not only confined to the hypocrisy and false claims that were used to promote the occupation of Iraq or in the number of its victims, its destructive effects now and in the future, but it is also said that it was committed for the liberation of Iraq, as is written on the tombstones of American soldiers.
وبعد يوم دام قتل فيه 54 شخصا على الأقل بينهم 18 مدنيا.
After a bloody day during which at least 54 people, including 18 civilians, were killed in Baghdad, an explosion of a booby-trapped car in the Nahr province injured 5 people. Meanwhile, a spokesman from the U.S. Embassy said that 2 people were severely injured and 6 others lightly injured in the tightly secured green zone in Baghdad after a repeated mortar attack yesterday. Also, a police chief and officer were killed in another separate incident. The number of unidentified bodies found in Baghdad and its outskirts has increased during the past 2 weeks. The director of Adliya Medical Center said the medical center is receiving nearly 25 bodies every day after the number was reduced to 2 bodies a day before this phase.
Iraqi security forces have launched fierce battles against the Mahdi army, killing 22 people and injuring dozens of others. Shiite leader Muqtada al-Sadr threatened wide-scale civil disobedience in the country. Following the clashes, the Iraqi government imposed a curfew in al-Samawa, al-Nasrallah, and Qut, as well as the Babel province.
The situation in the Iraqi province of Basra continues to worsen due to the fierce battles between Iraqi security forces and the Mahdi army. The wide-scale military operation dubbed Night Shock, led by the Iraqi Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki, was an attempt to get rid of the armed groups in Basra. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces clashed with armed groups at the port of Basra after they began to implement plans to stop the ongoing violence between conflicting armed groups in al-Basra. Meanwhile, the American forces said that suspected armed individuals were killed in Basra while they were trying to plant an explosive device on the roadside. Others involved in suspicious activities were injured. In the framework of the security operation, the Iraqi authorities imposed a curfew in the city, preventing the movement of cars and people, and suspended clashes in schools and universities. Hundreds of Sadr supporters held a peaceful demonstration in Baghdad, demanding that their movement not be targeted following the clashes in al-Basra. Supporters of the Sadr movement also organized strikes and declared civil disobedience in western Baghdad, protesting what they called human rights violations. A number of the Sadr movement's members were killed a few days ago in western Baghdad. The security situation in al-Basra worsened before the British handed over the security responsibility to the Iraqi government on the 16th of December 2007. The British still maintain some of their forces in the area.
العربية.
And with me now to discuss what all this means for Iraq is Zaki Chahab, bureau chief of Al Hayat newspaper and author of Iraq Ablaze Inside the Insurgency. Good to see you again. Why do you think this operation was launched now? Is the timing significant?
I think what happened is the last 48 hours, al-Maliki tried to make some changes in the way al-Basra is run. But the local council have refused to give authority to the commanders which really al-Maliki have appointed. A delegation went to Baghdad to see him and he refused to see them. He decided to go by himself to al-Basra and to deal with the situation as it really became out of hand.
Is the al-Sadr truce now effectively over?
Definitely the kind of confrontation going on, the kind of blood which is really running in al-Basra, the curfew which has been announced in many cities in the southern of Iraq reflects how, you know, the situation is quite more than usual. Definitely tonight will be decisive in determine what kind of atmosphere is going to be tomorrow, in spite of the calls by Muqtada Sadr himself today to his supporters that he's really looking forward to see this conflict solved through negotiation and through political means. Not he don't want to see blood going on between Iraqis.
So he is trying to calm things down, but the question is whether he has enough control over his supporters spread across Iraq.
This is really one of the questions being raised recently as a result of the attacks carried against the American by some of the militias belong to him. But the kind of control his militias have in Basra, the fight for power and the struggle with their rivals either from Badr organization or from Al-Fadila party reflects how far, you know, the situation like went out of hand. The kind of smuggling in terms of, like, you know, millions of barrels of petrol being smuggled from Basra either to Iran or to other parts of the world. And I think al-Maliki found himself cornered to take a decision to bring law and order, especially after, you know, the kind of killings which taking place and targeting civilians from all kinds.
A very important place, obviously, Basra itself. But some are actually saying you could look at it positively and say, well, at least the Iraqi forces are trying to take control themselves. They're not relying on anybody else at the moment.
I think the importance of today's fighting is that al-Maliki have brought his forces from Baghdad, from other parts of Iraq, because he couldn't really trust the army and the police which was recruited over the last 3 or 4 years. He found out that their loyalties are for their militias, either for a Sadr or for a Badr organization. That's why he brought the forces with him, and the kind of attacks and the at least 200 bombs have been, planted on the way to try to deter the forces coming to the city from entering the city.
In which case, are you saying then that the British left Basra in a poor state? They didn't recruit the right type of people?
That's very clear, because the British forces themselves are suffering. Every single night they are under attacks, missiles, all kind of bombs thrown at their military base. And even in spite of the calls by the Americans for the British to give some help, they refused to intervene. The only thing the British were happy to offer is that to help in preparing and training the Iraqis to be in charge of their security in Al-Basra and other cities which the British forces have withdrawn from.
Zaki Jahab, good to get your thoughts. Many thanks.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad held talks with the Secretary General for the Arab League, Amir Moussa. The two leaders discussed preparations for the Arab Summit and the general situation in the region. They also discussed the Damascus Declaration, which will be announced by the hosting country as a message to the summit. Despite the controversies surrounding the level of representation at the summit, preparations are underway amidst hope that the summit's resolutions will be at the level of expectations. Al-Mu'taz Billah Hassan has the details from Damascus.
Damascus is hosting two large events this year. The first event was a cultural one, as Damascus is the capital of Arab culture, and the second event has to do with the 20th Annual Arab Summit. Damascus, which exerted efforts to ensure the success of the first event, is now exerting more efforts to ensure the success of the second. If you have not already made a reservation in one of the hotels in Damascus, the chances are you will not find a room until the end of March. This news comes as all hotels in Damascus have been reserved for the Arab Summit.
As part of the preparations for the Arab Summit underway in Damascus, the hotels in the Syrian capital and its suburbs have been reserved for this event. The hotels have been upgraded to 3, 4, or 5-star hotels and are equipped to receive any number of Arab delegations planning to take part in the summit.
The streets of Damascus, which are usually busy, as the case has been during the past few years, witnessed a decline in the number of commercial ads, which were replaced by ads promoting the summit. The ads did not only focus on the task of the summit, but included messages of hope to all Arabs.
We are living amidst division and weakness. We hope they grant the Arab citizen his simplest wish by agreeing ideologically and unifying their positions.
I hope the kings and presidents of the Arab countries stand united to liberate the Golan and Al-Aqsa. The phrase Al-Aqsa is calling upon you is a call to all Muslims.
The situation in Lebanon, as everyone knows, has been unstable. In order for Lebanon to succeed, we need all Arabs to stand united. We are standing still while the West is continuing to surpass us.
The streets leading from the airport to the convention palace, where the Arab leaders are scheduled to meet, has undergone a facelift and has witnessed construction work around the clock, which has changed the look of the area. In addition, the street, which has become known as the Summit Street, has witnessed heightened security measures. During the days of the summit, all commercial flights from and to Damascus airport will be grounded, and some flights will be diverted to the Halab and Latakia airports. This is the main reception hall, where all news media outlets interested in the event will focus their attention. Here, everything seems to be in place, awaiting the arrival of Arab leaders. Nearly 26 buildings spreading over an area of 60 dunams have been set aside for this occasion. Local news media outlets devoted several paragraphs for the Arab Summit slogans. It is the Arab summit, which Damascus wants to be exceptional, even though it is taking place under the current circumstances. Meanwhile, Arabs are waiting to see whether the summit's resolutions will be compatible with the current events in the region. We go to the Lebanese ministerial cabinet, which is in session at this time in the Grand Saraya. Details with Agarit Dandash. Good evening, Agarit.
جورج لا أسمعك جيدا لكن بالنسبة لجلسة مجلس الوزراء الجلسة تستمر بالانعقاد منذ الساعة 6:30.
George, I can't hear you well. The session of the ministerial cabinet continues since its beginning at 6:30 and is being headed by Prime Minister Fouad Senora. It was held specifically to discuss Lebanon's participation in the Arab summit. According to the information we obtained, there are 3 possibilities the ministerial cabinet is considering. First, boycotting the summit. This is a likely possibility, particularly after it was requested that the Lebanese permanent representative to the Arab League, Khaled Ziyada, boycott the first meeting of the Arab League member representatives yesterday. This decision supports MP Walid Jumblat, Minister Joe Sarkis, and the Christians of the March 14th bloc. This possibility would mean that Lebanon remains absent from the summit, and it would be the first time that Lebanon is absent from the Arab summit. The second possibility is that Lebanon participates at a low level in the summit. This would be similar to the decision made by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which yesterday decided to have its representative to the Arab League participate in the summit. In the case of Lebanese participation, there are 3 names of people who may participate in the summit. They are, first, the permanent representative to the Arab League, Khaled Ziyada. The second prospect may be William Habib, who is an official in the Foreign Ministry, or the Ambassador Salim El-Nouamani, the Director General of the Foreign Ministry. The third possibility, which is being presented now in the ministerial cabinet session, is that Prime Minister Senora participates through a pre-recorded videotape in which he explains why Lebanon has decided not to participate in the summit and Lebanon's positions on the proposed issues to be discussed. George?
George?
Hezbollah leader Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah has renewed his commitment to retaliate for the assassination of terrorist mastermind Imad Mughniyeh. Nasrallah was speaking on a videotape message to last night's memorial rally in Beirut, marking the end of the 40-day mourning period for Mughniyeh. Nasrallah said his organization will choose the time, place and manner of punishment for Mughniyeh's leaders. Killers, I beg your pardon. The Hezbollah leader said the elimination of Israel was possible since its withdrawal from South Lebanon in 2000 and its defeat in 2006, shattering the myth of Israeli invincibility. And meanwhile, tensions are apparently mounting between Syria and Hezbollah because Damascus has yet to release its investigative report on the Mughniyeh assassination. Hezbollah has claimed that it has proof of Israeli involvement. There was anticipation that Syria would release details of the investigation, but that has yet to happen. And there are those in the Arab world who have suggested that Syria was behind the assassination in order to cover up its involvement in the slaying of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. Well, joining me now in the studio is Dr. Jonathan Spire of the Gloria Center at the IDC in Herzliya, an expert in international relations and especially the Middle East. Thank you very much, Dr. Spire, for being here. Well, we saw Hezbollah leader Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah last night, extremely defiant, spewing venom against Israel. Does he have reason to be so arrogant?
Well, the speech given by Nasrallah didn't really show us anything new. This has been Nasrallah's style since he adopted the leadership of Hezbollah back in the early 1990s, 1992. Does he have reason to? Well, in a sense, he has pragmatic reason to. This is the way in which, this kind of charisma that he has is what his leadership is based upon. He has become a legendary figure amongst the kind of circles inclined towards his style of politics because, primarily I would say, or very importantly at least, because of his speaking style. He speaks a very fine Arabic, use of Arabic language, not the case with every politician in Lebanon by any means. He knows how to press the buttons. And also I think he's invented a style in which he sets the parameters such that Hezbollah can never lose.
Right.
In other words, as long as Hezbollah manages to hit at Israel and to hurt Israelis, he can then define that as victory. That then fires up the crowd, and he's doing the job as he sets it for himself. So yes, he has a reason to be arrogant in the terms which he himself has invented.
Okay, let's talk about Syria for a minute. Syria, which of course, as we know, helps supply arms to Hezbollah. But in an article that you recently wrote, you revealed something that I didn't know, that Damascus has been named by UNESCO as the Arab culture capital for 2008. Does that sound outrageous to you?
Well, myself and my colleague Neil Bombs wrote the article because there did seem to be a certain irony in the sense that Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, speaking about Syria having this role, said he was going to call Damascus the capital of resistance, not only the capital of culture. And we looked into what that resistance actually means, and we found and know that Syria and Damascus remains home for really a very large number of terrorist groups, not only Hezbollah's connection, but of course also an alphabet soup, if you like, of Palestinian rejectionist organizations. And yes, there is, I think, a very great irony in UNESCO honoring a capital which itself proclaims itself to be a welcome home for a great number of terrorist organizations.
Right, indeed, interesting point. They seem to be rewarded for that, and nobody seems to know about it, which is indeed an interesting revelation. Now, Syria, on the other hand, is in some trouble, I understand, among the Arab League, because, if I understand correctly, about half of the Arab leaders in the Arab League are planning to stay away from the summit in Damascus next week. Why is that?
It is primarily because of the Syrian position towards the current situation in Lebanon. The fact is that today, the Lebanese, for the 17th time, the vote in Lebanese parliament was put off to elect the new president. Syria is seen as being primarily responsible for this untenable situation. The Arabs, particularly Saudi Arabia, are very, very upset about this. And as a result, they have no wish to help Damascus out by sending the top leaders to the summit. So, for example, Saudi Arabia is sending only its ambassador to the Arab League, which is pretty much about as low as it can get without it being openly insulting. The Egyptians are apparently sending their foreign minister, Abu Ghait. The Jordanians are not sending King Abdullah. So again, these are calculated but controlled slaps, you might say, to Syria.
Forces of the armed Palestinian Kifah, or struggle, have been deployed in the Ain el-Hilway camp to prevent the renewal of fighting that took place last Friday.
Representatives from the various Palestinian factions held an extended meeting in Ain el-Hilwa last evening. They prohibited fighting and called on the use of dialogue to solve security problems. Forces from an armed Palestinian Kifah spread inside the camp to prevent the renewal of clashes that took place last Friday. The force is composed of about 60 members. They wore military uniforms and were provided with Kalashnikov machine guns and rocket shells. They also deployed foot patrols in the areas of Safuri, Attiri, and the vegetable market, which was the site of the recent clashes. Head of the armed Kifah, Brigadier General Munir al-Miqda, took a tour inside the camp. He said that he expects further steps to be taken to reinforce the armed Kifah forces with members from all the Palestinian factions. Al-Miqda said that the deployment of the armed Kifah forces came as a result of the agreement and the blessing of all the Palestinian forces. He affirmed that what happened at Nahr al-Barid will not be repeated under any circumstances. This step came to signal the return of calm to the camp, and it was well received by its citizens.
God willing, this is a good thing for the camp's citizens. We do not want what happened to turn us into Nahr al-Barid. We do not want to leave Ain al-Hilwa. We are not waiting on compensation from anyone.
May God calm down everyone's nerves and make us victorious. May both sides die and leave us alone. They have made us weak.
Compensation for damages from the latest events will begin in the coming days, according to General al-Miqda.
The Palestinian Liberation Organization representative in Lebanon, Abbas Zaki, announced from Majid Leon that anyone in the camps wanted by the Lebanese authorities will be turned over. He also said that the chapter of Ain el-Hilweh clashes is closed.
The PLO representative in Lebanon, Abbas Zaki, said that the recent Ain el-Hilweh clashes have been concluded. He said that the first phase of the armed kifah deployment will be completed in the coming 3 days, adding that the Palestinian campus in Lebanon are not a nation inside a nation. Before giving these statements, Zaki had met with the parliamentarian Bahia al-Hariri in her home in Majd al-Ayoun.
Anyone pursued because of a moral or security problem or for actions not in harmony with the culture of Palestinians, their cause or their commitment will be turned in. We are not a nation within a nation. We asked our brothers in the camps not to conceal or provide opportunities for crimes to continue under the pretext of religion or Palestine, because the events of Nahr al-Barid should not be repeated.
تحت شعار الدين أو تحت شعار فلسطين لأنه يعني يجب.
Speaking about compensation for the damages in the latest clashes, Zaki said that those who committed the crimes and those who helped and hid them will be the ones to pay the price. If they recognize Lebanese and Palestinian sovereignty, they will make it easier on themselves.
In today's episode of African Affairs, we will examine the Kenyan file. It seems that Nairobi has entered a new political stage. This comes after the Kenyan Parliament approved the National Accord and Reconciliation Bill signed by Kenya's President Mwai Kibaki and opposition leader Raila Odinga. According to the power-sharing deal, a new post of Prime Minister will be created by changing the constitution. However, several knowledgeable sources believe this political deal could run into problems, which may renew the power struggle between Kibaki and Odinga. Will this deal withstand the intensifying political polarization taking place between the rival politicians in the country? Will the Kenyan public accept a government that is run by two different political blocs? Where is Kenya headed on the road of reconciliation amidst this political polarization?
بوادر نهاية الأزمة السياسية في كينيا بدأت تتجلى في الأفق بعد أن أصبحت بنود اتفاق.
The signs for a solution to the political crisis in Kenya have begun to appear in the horizon. This news comes after the articles of the National Reconciliation Accord, which sets out the details of the power-sharing deal, began to go into effect. In a unanimous vote, the Kenyan Parliament approved the National Accord and Reconciliation Bill signed by Kenya's President, Mwai Kibaki, and opposition leader, Raila Odinga. This latest move by the Parliament is expected to help the international efforts aimed at ending the political crisis in the country. According to the National Reconciliation Deal, the Parliament is to elect a new coalition government, which, in turn, will help end the bloody crisis in the country. Violence erupted in Kenya after the country held its legislative elections last December. The new power-sharing deal may face many obstacles and raise many questions, especially considering that, not until recently, the president in Kenya was the only one who had absolute power to run the country. The creation of a new post for the Prime Minister may further complicate the national equation and sway the decisions of the executive branch of the government. This could lead to a confrontation between the President and his new Prime Minister, or better said, between President Kibaki and opposition leader Odinga. The National Reconciliation Deal may have received wide support among the various political blocs in Kenya. However, it could very much run into a stalemate, which may lead to a new wave of violence in the country. The withdrawal of one of the two parties from the coalition or transferring the privilege to run the government from the President to the Prime Minister will likely lead to a direct confrontation between the President and his loyalists from one side and the opposition and its supporters on the other.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.